Good morning. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Hello. Hello, Jason. Hello, Mark. Hello, Matt. Welcome. I am John Beckman, Professor John Beckman, Dr. John Beckman, U.S. Senate GOP primary candidate in the state of Alabama. So today we are going to talk about, we're going to have a science update. I've been reading a lot of Nature Science articles. We're going to talk about some of the themes that are popping up in the Nature Science magazines. Those are the most, the most influential science articles, publications, magazines. We're going to talk about what's happening in there. But first, we're going to do genome engineering of dogs, which is really fun. And I'm gonna lay the case for this. You're gonna actually you're gonna be like, at the end of the video, you're gonna be like, that is a good idea. Like, why we should spend money doing that. We're gonna talk about genome engineering people. I'm gonna teach you how to do that. You probably won't be able to go home and do it, but I'll teach you how to do that. And then, so we'll talk about science today. But first, let's get a little bit of training here. Get a cup, get coffee in it. We need to wake up. It's Saturday. Normally most people are sleeping in right now, so we need especially to wake up if you're here with me. Okay, so let's do a citation to the simultaneous libation of Scott Adams. Oh, it's very, very good. Okay, so first let's talk about this article. So this was the article, this is one of the articles, this is popping up a lot, but this is one of the articles on Ebola that I've been talking about. So I'm just going to read a quote from this article. It's only a matter of time until the Ebola virus crosses borders. So I've been saying that, and I haven't been talking about Ebola specifically in relation to our border, but I have been teaching you that in terms of epidemiology, to control the spread of diseases, the first thing that people do is if there's a disease outbreak, they shut down the border. So I've been saying that actually there's actually a risk of illegal immigrants coming up through the southern border. We have no idea what diseases they're carrying. They're not vaccinated. So I've been saying we should shut down the border. And this is just evidence that scientists also believe that if you are not controlling the borders, you are putting yourself at risk of disease. Okay, I also wanted to talk about this article. So this was an article on a data set, a weather record data set, which is being used in climate sciences. And I talked about this in some of my climate science videos. I talked about there's a general pattern in science that 90% of basically all research articles, so 9 out of 10 of all research science articles are usually actually wrong. And it takes years and years and years for us to figure out which of those ones are actually right through people reproducing the data and the data holding its own over time. So it takes us a long time to figure out basically what data sets are accurate. And so this is just an example of this pattern in the climate science. So what this article says, the title is Flawed History of Key Weather Record. And this happens all the time in the climate sciences. So what they have is they have all these publications that use this old data set about weather in like Britain from like 100 years ago. And then all of a sudden somebody puts out a new publication and says, actually, like the way that you are interpreting that data is completely wrong. And so all that data needs to be reinterpreted through this XYZ model. And so this article is basically saying like all this old data that you are using to make predictions, that one of the things that the climate scientists will say is that it's gonna get drier and drier and drier in the hot seasons. It's gonna get wetter and wetter and wetter and snowier and snowier and snowier in the cold seasons. And this is basically saying, well, yeah, the data that you are using to make some of those predictions is actually like completely wrong. So this is just a pattern, and you actually see this in like the actual Nature magazine research articles. So my point is just that it's very, very, very difficult to take much science seriously because many of it gets overturned in the long run. So people making predictions of things that are going to happen like 100 years from now, 50 years from now, you can bet all your money that those people are going to be wrong. Okay, let's talk about this dude. So the title is Russian Biologist Plans More CRISPR-Edited Babies. So I don't know if you saw this story in the news a while back, maybe like 6 months, maybe like a year ago, a while back. There was a Chinese scientist, his last name was He. This Chinese scientist was the first person to genetically engineer human babies, okay? And the reason that the ethical, or well, you could call it unethical, you could call it ethical, but his justification for why he genome edited babies is he had this family, and the father had HIV. So if the father then wants to have an actual baby, the father has a risk, if he actually does it the natural way and makes a baby with his wife, if he makes a baby, there's a risk that that baby will inherit the HIV virus, okay? So there's a clinical scenario where you could, in theory, justify, well, we're going to genome engineer this person's baby to be resistant to the HIV virus. So that was the justification that the Chinese scientists used to genome engineer the first human baby. Okay, so what they did is, basically what you can do is you can take sperm and you can do in vitro fertilization. Okay, so you fertilize, you make an embryo in basically a petri dish. Okay, and then what the scientist does is they can take a little needle and they can micro-inject that egg, and into that egg they can put these, how do I say this to the public? They put these little machines, little tiny proteins that can engineer the genome. Okay, that's what the CRISPR-Cas9 is. They put these little molecules into the genome, and it engineers the embryo. Okay, and so what they did is they targeted a very specific gene. It's called CCR5. CCR5 is a receptor that when the HIV virus tries to invade a cell, it will grab onto this receptor, okay? And if they mutate or knock out that receptor, your embryo or your baby or your person or your whatever becomes 90% resistant to invasion of the HIV virus, okay? So basically what the Chinese guy did, I'll just summarize it very quickly, okay? The Chinese scientist took sperm, fertilized the egg in a petri dish, micro-injected it with the chemical that would edit its genome, edited and knocked out this receptor that makes it resistant to HIV virus, and then implanted that embryo into a human, and now that embryo grows up as, it was actually twins, grows up as twins, and now those twins are resistant to the HIV virus, so you've essentially ensured that the father who had HIV would not pass on that virus to the next generation, okay? So that's what they did in China. That was like 6 months, a year ago. Now the Russians are saying, well, if the Chinese are doing it, we are going to do it too, because like we're not going to fall behind in editing superhumans. So this Russian guy is saying, okay, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to reproduce these experiments. He's literally saying he's going to do the same thing. So he's going to take HIV couples that are HIV positive who want to have a baby that has their genetic composition. So they're choosing not to adopt, they're choosing to actually have a baby. And this guy is going to genetically engineer their embryos and then implant them so that they are resistant to the HIV virus. So here's a question for you. Okay, if the Chinese are doing it and the Russians are doing it, like what should the U.S. be doing? I'm actually just honestly thinking about this. Like, should the U.S. be genetically engineering human embryos? I don't know, because if we do not do this research, like we're gonna fall behind. And these people are going to develop the technologies that are going to become the real cures of the future. Okay, this is futuristic science right here. So should the U.S. allow genome engineering of human beings? Okay, that's just an open-ended question. So I have a way to kind of get you, if you don't agree that it's, I don't know, I don't have an opinion yet. I don't know, I haven't decided. But I definitely think we should be genome engineering dogs to sort of as a stepping stone so that we can develop the technology even though we might not be ready to genome engineer people yet. Okay, so it's kind of like a sidestep, which will allow us to develop the technology and will allow us to develop the research, and it will allow us to, at the time, think about the ethics of human engineering. So why would you do this? Okay, so now let's talk about genome engineering of dogs. Why would you do this? Well, so when the British Empire was up, the Britons were obsessed with dogs. Okay, and they would import dog breeds from different parts of the world back to Britain. And then they started basically like the Kennel Club stuff, where they would like build these breeds of dogs by crossing them to each other. And over time, you develop these many different breeds of dogs, okay? And while you're breeding the dogs, you have to inbreed them. That means like you cross them to their brothers and you make them mate with their brothers and their sisters to maintain certain traits that you want to select for. So like if you want to build a pug and from a normal dog, okay, the first thing you have to do is you mate a normal dog to a normal dog, and then you pick the offspring that has like the most smashed in nose, and then you take that dog that has the most smashed in nose and you cross it to its brother and its sister, okay? And so what they've done over the years is they've produced these dog breeds which are like incredibly sickly because they've been mating to them to their brothers and their sisters and their cousins for years and years and years. So this develops very, very, very sickly dogs. That's why purebreds, my dad used to always say this, like you don't want to get a purebred because they're usually dumber. Like the mutts are usually very, very smart because they've bred out their genes and they have a lot of genetic diversity. Anyway, so we have breeds like this Dalmatian. Okay, Dalmatian, because it's been inbred so many times, crossed to its brothers and sisters, it actually has a mutation in a gene, in a transporter, that basically makes it not allowed to, it can't transport uric acid properly. So it has very, very high uric acid contents in its blood and its liver. And this causes massive diseases for that dog. So this dog, the Dalmatian dog, lives a horrible, painful life because it has these genetic mutations that are constantly selected for, because as the breeders select for the traits that they care about, they're also selecting for this mutation that fucks up and hurts the dog, okay? So we can actually use this technology now to repair these dog genes and make our dogs healthy. So we can have our purebreds, but we can also re-engineer our purebreds to be completely healthy. So if you love dogs, like this is worth it. And it's actually like, if you ask like, well, why should we be spending money on this? Is it worth it? Like, first of all, it wouldn't cost so much money. And people love their dogs, right? And there's a funny concept. So, dogs have been with humans for like 20,000 years. Okay. We are in a relationship with dogs for the long term. We will have dogs for the next 50,000 years, if not more. Okay? So why don't we just spend the time right now and fix our purebreds so they're not effed up, so they don't have these horrible diseases. And that will also help us develop the technologies of genetic engineering. And eventually then we can decide on what we think about human genetic engineering. Okay, so let's fix our dogs. So, cheers. I hope you have a good Saturday. Hopefully the Russians and the Chinese will not create a new species of human beings which far surpasses the Americans by genetic engineering. We need to keep up to date with that research. Okay? So if you like the videos, this one's kind of just a fun one. I like talking science because I'm a scientist, so this is just kind of fun. If you like the videos, you can comment, you can share, you can go to eaglewolfpack.com, and you can vote on the primary in March 3rd, because let's be honest, like, if you put Tommy Tuberville and Bradley Byrne in the Senate and then they have to start voting on whether or not we should allow human genetic engineering, like, do they even know what the F they're talking about? No, they don't. Vote for me. End.